Rick Reynolds, and you're listening to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
This is Steve Bowtie Bryant here. Back in the 90s, I was a pro wrestling photographer for the South, and I released what might have been one of the original sets of indie trading cards. I ran across some of these original sets. They were up in Randall Fanning's attic all this time. PG-13 rookie card, Ricky Morton, George Weingroff as the Sheik, Chris Champion, Reno Riggins, Billy Montana, Gary Valiant, the Scorpion, the Medic, Rick Reynolds, Jeff Daniels, Mephisto and Dante, Ben Jordan, Steve Neely, Marcus Woodrow, Clinton Charisma, Little Farmer John. If you'd like an opportunity to get these cards, contact me now. You can get them for only $49.99. Contact me at stevebowtiebryant at iCloud.com. Get your set now while supplies last.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome one more time to the Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling podcast. And today, as always, my brother from the same father and mother.
And Dan.
No.
Sorry.
Jared, the Plastic Sheik Street. And you've already introduced yourself there by, calling yourself somebody else. So what's up? How are you doing?
I'm good, brother. How about yourself?
I'm great, but I'm sure you're a little better than great, but tell everybody where you just got back from.
I just got back from Hawaii, or as the natives call it, Hawaii. So
Hawaii.
It's more of a V sound, so it's I found that out on the trip. So
yeah, brother, welcome to Hawaii.
Yeah. It's we saw a lot of the islands, and it's a beautiful place. It's the time difference is kind of a killer, though, man. It's 6 hours from East Coast time. So I find myself trying to adjust to that, but slow process.
No joke, because Michelle and I got to go there on our honeymoon, and we were waking up at 4 a.m. and going to bed at 8, and it was just weird,
Yeah.
But beautiful, beautiful place, beautiful state,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just gorgeous.
I highly recommend it to anybody.
Absolutely. If you can deal with the plane trip, you can go.
Yeah.
But well, it's good to have you back. Of course, no one noticed. None of our listeners noticed because it's just been the normal 2 weeks since our last show. But this week we've got a really cool one, and this guy is kind of like everybody that I talked to when it comes to the wrestlers. They were like, you got to get this guy on. You got to get this guy on. So he's kind of one of those guys that's like your favorite wrestler's wrestler, and it's pretty cool when you know that somebody is so well respected, and so everybody wants to hear their story. So obviously that makes us want to have them on the show. Now, the good news is I got to know Rick a little bit in Nashville, and Rick's a straight up dude. That's all I can say. He's just a straight up, just real good guy. And we're just happy to have him on the show today. He is Rick Reynolds, aka Damien, aka Forsaken, aka Medic, whatever you want to call him. But the man has done a lot and done a lot of stuff, and honestly, just from the little bit that I know about him, I'm just excited to get to know him even more today on our show, man. Yeah, man,
he's the things you mentioned, it shows he has a lot of respect from other wrestlers, and man, that means a lot. Like you look at somebody like we've talked to a lot of people that have a lot of respect for people like Bobby Eaton and something like that. And when somebody is well revered like that, they're a solid dude, and that's going to be a good interview. That I'm looking forward to getting more information out of Rick and finding out all about his career.
Yeah, well, there's some interesting tidbits that we've been cued in to ask by our sources that we will never name. Thanks, sources.
Snitches get stitches.
Yeah, snitches get stitches. Wait, or would that make us the snitches about the stitches?
I don't know.
Snitches?
I don't.
Anyway, I have my resources. Sometimes if the internet doesn't tell you everything, you got to go a little bit higher up the knowledge tree. You know what I'm saying? So good news is I know a lot of guys that know a lot of cool stuff. So anyway, like I said, the sources will never be named, but we thank you, sources. You know who you are. Anyway, well, I tell you what, why don't we just go ahead and get the show started with Mr. Rick Reynolds? What do you say about that?
That sounds great, man.
All right. We'll be right back with Rick Reynolds, a.k.a. Forsaken, on the Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling podcast after these messages.
Hey guys, this is Wolfie D from PG-13. Check out my podcast, Live and in Color with Wolfie D, every Monday at noon. We're talking Memphis, we're talking ECW, WCW, WWF, everywhere that I've been. We even have some great guests, some Hall of Famers on the show with us. Every Monday, Live and in Color with Wolfie D.
That's right, it's the talk of Middle Tennessee, the channel you love to hate and the channel you hate to love. It's Brian Turner from Brian Turner's VHS Rehab. And if you're looking for matches from Wolfie D to Jerry Lawler to Dusty Rhodes and the team that put a pimp before your eyes and a goatee between your thighs, Booty Call and Athena, go to lostwrestling.com. See, I made it easy for you. Brian Turner's VHS Rehab. Booyah.
What you doing, Jimmy Straight?
How you doing, man?
Hey, let me get over here and get off the road here in a minute.
Okay.
I started rolling on up, trying to save. I still got about 4 hours before I get home.
Shoot.
Left out at 9 this morning. I own a expediting little company, trucking company. Yeah. And once a year, for about 2 months, we deliver yearbooks everywhere.
Huh.
And for Johnston, and I did the very first one, and this is the very last one. I had to take 2 stops, at one in Dover, Tennessee, and then drive one down to Houston. So I'm coming back from that.
That's pretty cool, man. How did you get into that?
Tommy Hicks.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I was a police officer for a lot of years.
I thought I remembered that. Yeah.
I did that total of 21 years. And matter of fact, I wrestled and I worked narcotics. And so I worked under a hood, and then I would leave out and go work. and Jamie Dundee one time was at the fairgrounds, and Wolfie and Jamie was, and I'm sitting there talking to him, and Jamie hollered, "He's a narc!" And I said, "Jamie, shut up! Hey, look at everybody, narc!"
Oh my God!
Shut up! I know. Shut up!
That's just, you. I'm just blown away that you were a narcotics officer and you actually were around Jamie Dundee.
I was just a police officer when I started wrestling.
Okay.
And I went with Gypsy. I went to talk to Gypsy, and literally, here I'm a cop, and Joey Rossi took me into his house, and there was pot smoke so thick you could cut it with a knife. It was so thick. Walking in here, I'm like, oh no.
Yeah. That is a fine line to cross right there. It's like, I really want to do this wrestling.
I'm telling you, nobody ever really done it around me. Just about everybody knew who I was and respected that. And, I didn't go in on their stuff. They didn't come in on mine. So
sure. But I mean, the remnants are hard to hide on marijuana. Let's just be honest, so.
Absolutely it is. And, but one of the things I found is that I think 98% of the people I know smizzes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know too many people. I don't, but
right.
There's just about everybody I know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we're glad you're here. So let me go ahead and kick us in here because I feel like we'll get into other conversations and we'll just record that. All right, we are back with more from Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling. And today, y'all, I'm very excited, Jared. And I've been talking about him in the earlier part of the show here. But this man right now is a giant in the business. He's one of the guys that honestly was a locker room leader. He was one of the guys that you could go to and ask him how to do a match. And he was a big man, but he understood wrestling. He understood all the intricacies of doing storylines. And he also just understood that old thing called psychology. But the cool thing I like about him is he's not only a pro wrestler, he's a former police officer, he's a minister, and he's on the show today. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. Rick Reynolds, a.k.a. Forsaken, a.k.a. whatever you want to call him. Just don't call him anything bad. Won't end up well for you. But Rick, welcome to the show, brother. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're so nice, Jimmy. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, brother. And hey, man, I've been wanting to have you on one of my podcasts. And since the other one dropped the ball, I'm going to take the ball.
Good. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. So we always start off with the main question, the number one question, and that one always goes to the Plastic Sheik himself, Jared Street, my own brother, flesh and blood. Jared, take it away.
All right, Rick. So this is a question I like to ask. I didn't come up with it, but we'll act like I did. But this kind of lets people know your influences in wrestling and your favorite people in wrestling. If you had like 4 or 5, like a Mount Rushmore of wrestlers of all time, your favorite, what would that be?
You know, I listened to your podcast also, so I knew this was coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The very first one on my list would be the Mongolian Stomper.
Oh,
and
nice.
The reason it would be the Mongolian Stomper was when I was a kid, I used to have dreams. I grew up in East Tennessee, and I had dreams about wrestling the Mongolian Stomper. And I got to see him several times live, never met the man, always wanted to work once I got into business, but never had the opportunity. But my very first one would be the Mongolian Stomper.
That's awesome.
My second one would be Ronnie Garvin.
Oh,
and
love it.
I went and watched him and Boris Malenko. They had a feud in Knoxville territory.
Yes.
And I watched them, and I absolutely loved. I drove different towns just to watch that feud of Ronnie Garvin, and I got to meet Ronnie Garvin at the Gulf Coast Wrestlers Reunion down in Mobile, Alabama, and he and I got to talk about the feud, and so I have ultimate respect for Ronnie Garvin. I think my third would be Nikita Koloff.
Okay.
Oh, man.
Nikita and I, a few years ago, got to spend a lot of time together, and I actually got to take the Russian sickle a few times.
Oh.
And we traveled a lot, and we talked Jesus, and he's a minister now also, and to hear his stories and just to talk with him and spend time with him, it helped me grow as a man and my walk with God. He was really strong and influential in that.
That's
and
awesome.
I was thinking about my last one, and I started going through it, that there's several people that I wanted to put in there. I was thinking about Shane Morton, and I love Shane Morton, and we've been, friends for 30 years. And I go through, and of all the great guys, I've had something to do with their life or them with me, and I wanted to put them in. And I thought about it hard and long. There's a lot of great wrestlers I've wrestled. I think is just good as anybody out there. Scott Spade up in Chicago, Rough Crossing, those guys. Eric Freedom out of Michigan. He and I have had great matches together. And I've decided to put in the fourth spot was somebody that allowed me to love wrestling again. Because at one point in my life, and we'll get into it, is that I was going to step away.
Yeah.
And his name is Jimmy Blaze. and he's the owner of Powell Entertainment out of Chicago.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I noticed him on your list quite a bit of work guys you've worked. So, I did a little research myself, and that's a cool name. I like that. We'll check him out for sure. Listeners, go check out Jimmy Blaze. That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great list,
Thank you
Rick.
so much.
Yeah, very original too, because there's 2 Canadians, a Minnesota Russian, and an indie guy. You gotta love that. Yeah.
When Nikita and I, we were in Tampa, and we were sitting at this restaurant talking, and I asked him, I said, why did you change your name? He said, for the gimmick. Yeah. He changed his whole personality, everything, for the gimmick. That's commitment to wrestling right there, baby.
Yeah, and he gets a lot of flack from some of the guys who make fun of him for using the accent. But do you remember when I was doing the Omar Al-Kazan gimmick? Do you remember that,
I don't
Rick?
think so.
Yeah, because I think I'd already ended that. And as much as Shane wanted me to do it down in Columbia when you and I and everybody worked together, I was actually happy to kind of be away from it because it allowed me to be myself. But long story short, I was doing this kind of Middle Eastern oil tycoon character, and I found myself doing the accent too. I almost feel like it was a way for him to maintain, to not let up on it, and that's the way I've always seen why he probably stuck with the accent sometimes when maybe it wasn't necessary, but
he lived the character.
Yeah. Well, he's a great guy. He really is. I got to work with him. Well, he was on a show and he did a little, devotional during the middle of the show there. And he gave his testimony, and Nikita was really cool. He actually was very cool, took a picture with us and just kind of great stuff like that. But just talked to him a little bit, and he prayed for us before the show. It was really cool, man. Very nice man. Very nice man.
Good man.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we're here to talk Rick Reynolds today. So we'll talk Nikita when he comes on. So, Rick, tell me a little bit about you growing up here, brother. Where were you born and where'd you go to high school?
I was born in a little small town up in East Tennessee called Sunbright.
Okay.
I had a graduating class of about 40 people. It's up in Morgan County.
Okay.
And it was, like I said, it was just a little small town. I left there. I went to college at Roane State. I went there to play basketball, and I had a terrible attitude and everything. And as a matter of fact, I still can do the same things I did when I played there. Sit down and watch back and forth the ball go up and down. And so that's all I did. And so I didn't last long there. I quit because, like I said, I had a bad attitude, and I thought it was the coach, but it was all me. Yeah. And so left there, and then moved to Nashville, and I started working the prison down in Nashville.
Okay. Yeah.
That was my very first, full-time job, was the prison.
Now, you're saying basketball. So obviously in high school, did you play basketball? Did you also play football? What did you play in those days?
I played football until freshman year, and I got cut from my basketball team, and I was furious that I got cut. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, I've got a picture and where they took a picture of me, and I had an old suit on, uniform on, and I looked like I was beat to death. I was determined that because I was one of the tallest players. I'm 6'5" now. Yeah. And so, I was determined I was going to get better. And one summer, I had my dad put me a goal up, and we made a backboard, and he put it up on a telephone pole, and I played basketball 8 hours a day. I mean, I played and played and played, and the next year I made the team, made the junior varsity, and as a junior I was starting, and I had a pretty good career there at Sunbright, but it's a small school, so and I went on to Roane State, and I didn't do well at all there, and so I left and went into the workforce.
Yeah, I understand that one for sure. So, okay, now we know you not only as all these other things, but as an awesome wrestler, and we're going to get into all that, but the start of it really is, when did you start liking wrestling?
kid. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I would watch out of the Knoxville channel, watch Robert Fuller and all that, and I watched Nick Goulas wrestling, and I just absolutely loved it. My grandparents would watch Nick Goulas, and I used to watch, Tojo Yamamoto and Gypsy and all the one, Lynn Rossi.
Yeah.
And Lynn was actually, him and Joey was instrumental about me getting into wrestling.
Yeah.
Actually.
Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your start in wrestling.
Yeah.
So I was a police officer in Williamson County, and Lynn Rossi had a health food store in Brentwood.
The one Tommy Hagee told us about?
Probably. Matter of fact, they had a picture of Tommy and Joey, a big oil painting when they tag teamed up on the wall.
Yeah.
And so I knew who Tommy was, but I never met Tommy at this time. And I used to go in there, and things were different back then. Not anybody could get into wrestling.
Right.
And I would go every day, and I would go talk to Lynn. And we became friends, and I tried to get him to tell me something about wrestling. I tried to get him to train me. I tried to, and he just wouldn't do it. I mean, he wouldn't smart me up. He wouldn't put me with somebody. He never did. We talked about everything, but when it got to that, he cut me off. Yeah. And Joey Rossi, his son, one day I was talking with him, and this is after months of me talking to him. And he told me, he says, Rick, he said, do you really want to get into wrestling? I said, I want to do that more than I ever want to do anything else. And he said, well, if you're serious, you be here at the shop at 6 o'clock. At 5:45, I was sitting in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Joey came out and unlocked the door and looked at me. Came out like he said, "Are you sure?" He said, "I want to tell you before you get in it." He said, "You're going to see all kinds of people and see all kinds of things, and you're going to have to separate your life from wrestling and your private life." And I said, "I'm willing to do that." And that's when he took me over to Gypsy Joe's house over in off of Nolensville Pike, and I met Joe for the first time.
Yeah. Now that's awesome. So let me ask you real quick here. Now, Gypsy Joe had a reputation, obviously, about him of one of the toughest, guys ever in the business whatsoever. How did that translate into your meeting him and continuing on with him?
Joe, he liked the Smiths. And so, I walked in and it was just, I was like, oh no. And so he looked at me and he talked to me for a minute, and he told me, he says, Thursday, you be here. And it's off of West End. And I was there, and we got in and talked, and he got me in the ring, and he says, okay, I train you. And I can tell you, the Gypsy Joe where I trained is not like the Gypsy Joes some other guys down the road. Joe worked us, and I can't tell you a hold that I didn't have to do to his perfection. One day, they put me in an arm bar in the back, and I had to grab the back of the head and flip over the guy and land on my feet. And I did that one whole day until I landed on my feet like I was supposed to. I was falling on my head, falling everything, and he cussed me and get up, do it again. And I did it again. I never gave up, and he wouldn't let me give up. Yeah. But he taught me every hold that you could ever see. I did that hold during training.
Yeah. Now, who were you training with in the ring? Because just not to knock on Gypsy, I think the world of Gypsy, and again, I respect his abilities and everything like that. But you're probably a good foot taller than him.
Oh yeah, at least. Yeah, that didn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. But who were you working in the ring with him?
See, Cool Breeze Williams just finished up when I started. There was a guy, and I was coming in at the time, and I can't remember the name of the promotion that was down in Nashville, but Dr. Squash was running a UWF or something like that. And Max Payne was down there, and a guy named Barry Cootie and Gentleman Jim Corbin. And but anyway, that was the group that was running Nashville, and Gypsy was there with them. And so there was a guy, like I said, Breeze just finished. I come in, and I had a friend of mine wanted to train. He was my same size, and so Joe was training him and me both, and we were going in as the medics with him, going against, I can't think of his name, is Bubba Perry, and Street was his last name, his partner.
Yeah.
They were the interns.
Okay.
So they was turning them babyface, going to bring us in as the heel team, and they're a veteran team, so we was green as grass, so they could carry us through a program. So that was the plan. Yeah. And so there was a guy from Manchester, a little small guy, muscled up. He was training there with me. He started about the same time, and a guy named Luscious Leslie Love. And he was in mid-training. He was working matches, but he was still training. And I was happy always to see him there because Gypsy normally cussed him out instead of me. So.
That's awesome.
Let me tell you one story about Joe, then we'll move on.
Please.
I was training, and I couldn't throw a drop kick and Gypsy started cussing me, and he told me, he says, "You kicked me right here in the head. You kicked me. You kicked me." And he cussed me. So I jumped up and I kicked the dog out of Joe. I hit him so hard his ear was bleeding, knocked him up against the rope, and he rolled out. His ear was bleeding, and he was cussing me, and he started to reach up underneath and he brought out a big 2x4. And he got in there, and I told my buddy, I said, if he just tried to hit me with that 2x4, I said, I'm fighting him.
Right.
And he got that 2x4. He looked at me and raised that 2x4. He says, "Oh, you stiff SOB. Now you kick this 2x4. I had to spend the rest of the time doing drop kicks on that 2x4.
That's, oh, man.
Oh, Joe.
God bless Joe. Yeah, God bless Joe.
So do you consider that like your first match, or what's your first match?
My first match was in Hartsville, Tennessee, and I don't remember the guy running, but Joe called, and me and my partner Sam, we went to Hartsville, and that was our very first match against a guy named Tommy Vito. And Tommy had been around for a while, and another guy named Joey Jarrett was our very first match in Hartsville, Tennessee.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we're kind of dancing around a little bit here about the topic, but when do you remember basically getting your first encounter with my co-host and partner in podcasting, Live and in Color with good old-fashioned PG-13 Wolfie D? When do you remember seeing him first?
Pete, his stepdad, I worked for Pete once I left the prison system. I worked for Pete as security over the hospital in Williamson County. Yeah. And I actually moved into the apartment complex down in Nashville where Pete was living.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Pete and I became good friends, and Camille, and so we spent a lot of time together. And then Warren, he was just a child. He was, I guess he was 7 or 8 years old, maybe 9. Okay. And he was still, and I used to sit there with him actually, and he'd show me wrestling moves. He had these wrestling, and he have all these, he's always been creative, and he would take it and do these wrestling moves and show me all these wrestling moves. Yeah.
That's funny.
That was the first time I met Warren.
So, okay. So now, was this in the world famous LA part of Nashville?
Yes, it was. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now tell Jared what LA stands for.
Lower Antioch.
Yeah. Now, if you've ever heard a promo from a very famous, actually, Jared, who's my favorite pro wrestler of all time?
Ric Flair?
Maybe the other Rick.
Oh, Ricky
me?
Morton. Yeah, Ricky
No,
Morton.
well, Rick Reynolds too. I love Rick too, but Ricky Morton's probably my favorite wrestler of all time. And I always heard Ricky Morton say it in random promos that he was from Lower Antioch too. So that's pretty funny. Yeah. So when it gets down to it though, Wolfie talks about around 13, 14, 15 years old is when he was sneaking his way into the ring. Do you remember first working with him?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Actually, Camille, his mom, came to me, and I'd been working probably 7, 8, 9 months thereabouts, and she came to me. And Warren has always loved wrestling, and she asked me if I would train him. And Pete talked to me about doing it, and so I agreed to get him in the ring and start working with him.
Yeah.
But, he was a natural, I'll tell you, because he's always watched wrestling. So, if you told him to do something, he already knew the basic moves, and that's more than what most people can do now. You tell somebody to do a top wrist lock, and they don't even know how. Warren was a natural. He already knew how to do all this stuff.
Yeah. And he was easy. Yeah, and he was an athlete, and it was probably simple for him to come into now. But Gypsy Joe maybe had a little issue with it. Is that right, Gypsy?
Gypsy cussed me. I know of 3 good cussings he gave me for that because one of them was because where we trained at was over in West Nashville, and it was a little garage that had a ring in it, and it had about 3 layers of carpet on it, and the boards was rotten, and it smelled like cat pee, and it was but that's where we trained, and so the very first time I went in there, and I didn't ask Gypsy to go up there, and I guess the guy that owned the garage called, and Gypsy came up there, and he cussed me. Lord, I thought he was going to fight me that day.
Oh, man. Okay, well, so tell me a little bit about some of the promotions you were working for, because I ultimately want to get to talking about, one of my favorite tag teams, one of the best tag teams of all time, in my opinion, Dante and the Great Mephisto. I want to get to that, where you start working with them, but kind of lead us up to that process, if you don't mind.
I started out as the medic, and like I said, we originally was going to go in to Dr. Squash's thing, and then that folded, and so we didn't do much with them. And then I just started working little outlaw shows here and there, trying to get my name out. And we went and met Dutch Mantel, and we went to Memphis, and we worked the Blackbirds down on Memphis TV, and so the funny thing, that's the first time I ever did TV, and was both nervous. Very first time I met Jamie Dundee, and Jamie was like 15 years old.
Yeah.
And he wasn't no different then than he was now. And I love Jamie, by the way. Yeah. Some of the best times.
Yeah.
Rick Reynolds, everything. So, the very first thing he told my boy, he said, if I was you, I'd take that gum out of your mouth before you get out there. He said, somebody smack it out. This little guy said it, And so we went out there, and Sam wasn't as well-versed in wrestling as I was. And I'm still far from being good, but they got in there. They were supposed to take the finish on me. I told them I'd take it. And we was working Brick House and Iceman King Parson. Oh, and King Parson gave Sam a DDT, and Sam fell on King Parson's shoulder, and they like to beat the dog out of Sam. They threw me out of the ring and beat the dog out of Sam. And Brickhouse come off top rope. He didn't catch himself at all. I mean, he landed flat on Sam and pinned him. And Sam quit right after that. And,
wow.
That was his last. But I continued going, and then I worked down in Tullahoma, Winchester, Then I got into Columbia, and I started working as the medic down in Columbia for a lot. You know, and you got to keep in mind, I was still working, you know, a few nights a week, and plus I went into being a police officer, and I was still working full time there, and I'd have to wear a mask to go work these other places, and I'd go back to work, you know, and be a police officer after been wrestling. Yeah. And so I did the medic gimmick, and then when Cool Breeze Williams was the Great Mephisto, and with Tommy, and I'd been working with Pete because I was a pretty good sized guy, and Pete, I could stand behind him and you couldn't see me. Right. So, and there wasn't too many other guys that size, so me and Pete were married for about 4 years together. Yeah. And then Cool Breeze quit wrestling, and they asked me to be the next part of the Devil's Disciples. And so when he left, I went in as Damien. So it was Damien and Dante, and we ran, I guess, 12 years or so. Tommy and I did, and we ran, did NWA. We worked Music City. I did all the stuff around, and then it was a good run with Tommy. Sure was.
Because, you know, people don't understand this too, is that honestly, you know, because there was Memphis and the Memphis territory, which had, you know, the Louisville, Nashville, Evansville, you know, all the other shows, but then you also in Jonesboro, those kinds of things. But then you also had this offshoot of kind of like the Middle Tennessee outlaw scene, where honestly that was like its own territory, where a lot of the USWA guys would come in and work on their, you know, one night off or 2 nights off. They would sometimes have a night off, and they would come in and work. And, you know, basically you guys were working 5-6 nights a week, but then, so you're working very similar to what the USWA guys are working. Instead, though, you're kind of doing all the other kind of ancillary towns that sometimes they would come visit. So you would run into a lot of people, I'm sure, during that time.
Absolutely. Terry Rice ran Power Pro, and at one time, Terry Rice had it going on, and Pete was booking for him, and that was the very first time I met New Jack. He was with Junkyard Dog.
Wow.
And they came over to Terry Rice's show. We was running Woodbury, and we was packing that place out.
Yeah.
And literally packing it out. I think that was the most heat I ever got as a single wrestler was there, and I was Santa Claus. And Pete was the big baby face, and I come in and was throwing candy and everything to everybody, and I reached out and said, I got something special for you. And I reached over and had a brick in the thing. He reached down to get his present, and I cracked him over the head, and he juiced, and then I reached over and pulled the medic hood down over, and man, I got beat to death before I got back and dressed up.
Yeah. So real quick before we get off of Pete, I know we're going to bring him up a little bit later in the show too, but when it comes to Pete, I've heard that when he put a chop on you, that he could actually touch your shoulders with his fingertips. Is that? Oh
yeah. Yeah. He was huge. Pete was huge. But you know who had the hardest chop besides Joe? Was Cool Breeze Williams.
Yeah.
Cool Breeze chopped me one time and popped my backbone.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
We were down in, we're in Columbia, and Breezy would always talk to you in the ring. Hey there, buddy. How you doing there? And he went, and he said, here's a little chop. And he killed me. And I can take a chop.
Sure.
But he hit me, boom, and my back popped. And I said, oh, Breeze. I said, just leave me alone for a minute. He went, that was a good one, wasn't it, buddy? and I'm laying there just dying. Shoot, Joe. I mean, he was tough.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah.
So I always like to ask this. I asked the previous Devil's Disciples interview we had. I asked them this question: how was it working under a mask, under the hood?
You know what? I worked under the hood for so long. It wasn't no issue for me, because from the time I started until I started the Forsaken character, I was always under a hood. And so, you know, once you get used to it, it's not bad. if I had to go back now, it would be a different story.
Yeah, because, Arvel would say stuff like the peripheral vision sometimes is off. You have to get used to that and stuff like that. But
choke your wind and stuff like that.
Yeah, choke your wind.
Right.
Yeah. So give us a little bit quick rundown of the gimmicks up until this point. So you're the intern, you did the medic.
I did the medic, and then I went into a Damien. I only had 2 at that time. Yeah.
Okay, 2 at that time. And then also you are protecting and serving. Now, what was the police force you were working for at this point?
I worked at the Williamson County Sheriff's Department, and then I worked at Brentwood.
Okay.
And then from there, when I started doing the Damien character, is when I got in and I was working narcotics also.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Man, that's got to be a crazy job there. I know this isn't Give Me Back My Police Department, but working pro wrestling or the narcotics, which was the tougher one?
Probably the pro wrestling. It actually saved my life one time.
Oh, wow.
I took off to go wrestle, and then I was going to come back, and my partner that was with me, they were going to Clarksville, and a drunk driver hit him and killed the drunk driver and hurt my partner. But I would have been in the car with him if I hadn't went to go wrestle.
Holy cow. Cow. So we've elicited some responses from some of your peers and some of my old buddies, and so we've had some questions kind of come up, and it's more about stuff that they want to hear you talk about. So one of the things, and again, if the timing is off, that's okay because we just bounce all over the place anyway. Even though we're trying to tell a little bit of a story along a line here, chronologically speaking. But Shane gave me a funny story that saying the Harding Mall when the ring broke with Dante and the Mortons. What was this much later, or was this around this time, or?
No, this is when me and Tommy was working together, and Terry Rice ran a show at the Harding Mall, and it had a good show. And the very first match, Pete Cannon dropped a leg, and the whole ring hit the floor. Boom!
Yeah.
Very first match. And so they tacked it up a little bit, and they ran another match, and it broke. And Terry come to us and said, "Guys, you got to save us." So we just did a big brawl. And at that time, I was pretty heavy in martial arts for several years, and it was hard for me to throw working kicks.
I bet.
Because but anyway, and so Shane Morton, Dante had Shane and had him hooked, and he said, "Hey, Ricky, kick him." I said, "Okay." And the guy, one of the marks over there, said something about it being fake. I said, "Fake?" And one of the things about me is that you hear a lot of stories. People can say whatever they wanted to about wrestling and it being fake, but I never wanted them to think I was fake.
Sure.
I always wanted them to know they couldn't beat me up. No matter what they thought, I was the guy that they couldn't beat up. So I went and I kicked Shane, and I kicked him right. I almost knocked Tommy out. I kicked him so hard. Kicked Shane in the mouth, and his head went back, and it hit Tommy. And so I turned around, did my thing, come back, grabbed Shane, and he's bleeding out of his mouth, busted his lip, cut it. I said, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "You did it." I said, "Oh, man, I'm so sorry." I laid him open. Sure.
Wow.
So you're talking about martial arts there a little bit. Tell us a little something about going with Wolfie to a karate tournament.
I know he went with me to a couple of them. I did pretty well. Normally, I was in it for a lot of years. I did Ishinru, which is an Okinawan style, and we used to do MMA before MMA was cool.
Yeah.
We did grappling, ground techniques, joint manipulation, all the good stuff, knees, elbows. And so he went with me one time. At one time in the middle, they had different rankings, and I was 5th in the Southeast ranking. And Wolfie went with me, and I don't think anybody ever got anything on me. And he was like, "Oh, man, that's so cool." Just loved it. I need to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, well, another one of my favorite people, and I just had him on the podcast with Wolfie D, is Ben Jordan. And of course, we love the Wild Boys, Ben Jordan, Steve Neely, great tag team. Honestly, at the end of the episode, we were trying to get them to say the Mount Rushmore of Tennessee tag teams, and they kind of went Memphis with it, and I respect that. That's what they like growing up. But what I was wanting to hear was like the Devils, the Wild Boys, the Mortons, and the Scott brothers. That's kind of what I was expecting to hear, and I kind of wanted to hear that. But so obviously Ben now is a good friend of mine, and he brought up a question that I have to ask you, and he really wanted it to kind of elicit a response from you as well, where it's these trips to Evansville with Ashley Hudson and Ben Jordan, and then there was apparently a snowstorm and a cigar and a locker. You locked your keys in the car. So go ahead. I'm gonna let you talk.
So we were leaving out to go to Evansville to work, and I think it was either Ben or Ashley, one of the two, that called the guy and said, "Listen, it's supposed to get bad up there." And he said, "Oh no, we're having wrestling. Come on." I said,
"Yeah,
okay, here we go." So we're going up, and we hit the Penny Rile going up, and by I think it was Madisonville or something like that. A mate was driving, and he's from Australia, so they don't have a lot of snow up there, or down there, I should say. And all at once he hit, and we went around and around, went through the medium, and ended up in the medium facing the other way. And I said, "Kick it, Ashley," and he went and kicked it, and finally we got us out, and we went around to the side, and finally got out of that and drove to Evansville. And when we got there, guess what? No wrestling. They had canceled it.
Of course.
And I don't remember him locking the keys in the car. It doesn't surprise me, but I don't remember it. And
was there something about a celebratory cigar after?
Ashley and I, on the way back from a successful night of wrestling, we normally had a good cigar, and I used to. I haven't done it probably 20 years.
Yeah.
I would get Cuban cigars.
Yeah.
And we'd always smoke high-dollar Cuban cigars.
Hey, nothing says class. Yeah, that's classic.
We'd have a glass of port and Sherwood and a cigar on the way back.
Man. Well, we're going to bring up Ashley in a little bit. I don't want to talk too much about him. We've got a little thing at the end. We play the name game, and I want you to talk more about him. But so I just, a couple other things that I've heard about that I've got to ask you about. And again, if my timing is off on some of these, but I would love to hear about the year-long feud with Shane Morton.
Shane and I, we worked. I bet I've worked Shane 300 times.
Yeah.
Through tag teams and all that. But he and I, we've worked down in Columbia just constant. And I think that one of the funniest stories with me and Shane, I was doing a thing with a snake, and I was scared to death of a snake. And Charmin Charles was my manager back then. And Charles always played with snakes. And I had to go over to his house, and he had to educate me on snakes and the snake I had, because I was so scared to hold it. And but we did the finish where I reached into the bag and pulled out a snake and then put it over Shane's head, the bag with the snake in it. And Shane poked himself with a razor blade like he'd been bit, and took a Alka-Seltzer, and I pulled that off. And Shane's sitting there shaking, and the fans hollering, "He's been bit! He's been bit!" And Shane's sitting there, and they call the ambulance, and Shane goes to the hospital. Sure did. They thought it was a snake bite. And but Shane and I had some great angles, and and we've done a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
We did one angle over in Laverne, and those guys over there, Lord have mercy. We were on like third match, and everybody had already bled and went through chairs and and me and Shane sitting there looking at each other. And Shane says, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Let's not do anything." And he said, huh? I said, let's not do anything. I said, we won't touch you. We'll play cat and mouse. And we done that for a couple times. We did it in Columbia, and we did it there, where the whole time limit, we would never touch each other. I'd jump out, come out, you scared, and he'd get out, and I'd get in the ring and all that stuff. And I had people slobbering, trying to get a hold of me to try to get me into the ring. And then about the time they'd start to count, Shane would grab me and rear back to hit me, and the bell would ring, and I would slide out. And every time we've done that, the crowd, they had to hold them back to keep from getting to me. You know, you're a chicken, because here I'm so much bigger than Shane, you know, and I'm playing, you know, and man, they're just slobbering. We did it one time over in Columbia, and a guy passed out. He looked at me and he said, "I hate you," and he passed out.
He passed out.
He passed out. He was shaking. He just. I said, "Come on, let's go back to the dressing room."
Yeah, there's nothing else you can do. That's the best.
There's nothing else you can do. Let's go back to the dressing room.
Okay, so I've heard as well that you are a kind of guy that when you get shot into things happen, such as you getting shot into the dressing room and something happened. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I love UConn.
Yeah.
Probably more than he loves me. But you don't ever fire somebody before they go out for their match. He'd tell me, and I'm a different guy now, and
sure.
I wouldn't do something like that. But me and Shane was working down in Tullahoma, and UConn told me he wasn't going to bring me back. And so I've always been a businessman. You know, I love wrestling, but I also got paid anywhere, and I've spent some nights at home because of that. But I always got paid no matter where I was at. Yeah. And so he didn't want to pay me what I wanted, so he was going to end me up. And so he put me and Shane out there, and I absolutely tore that whole place apart. I tore the railings off the side, and I grabbed Shane, and they had the dressing rooms, and had the particle board on it, and I threw Shane in it, and it hit boom, and I grabbed him. I told Shane, I said, reverse it, and Shane threw me, and I hit that thing as hard as I could, put a big hole in it, and you could hear the boys in there, he's coming through, and they're sitting there holding the wall up. And,
like the Kool-Aid man.
Yeah, I mean, I get that thing everything I could, and
was there something about it? Yeah, go ahead. Was there something about a car maybe that was your own? Yeah, what was it? It was
my car. We started fighting outside, and UConn was coming out. Oh, stop! And I had my van sitting out there, and I told Shane, I said, throw me in that van, and he threw me in it. Boom! And UConn was like, oh, stop! That's not the cars, not the cars. But it was my cars. So.
Yeah. Okay, so, you know, we kind of got some stuff there about Shane, and obviously your story can't be told without Shane. Obviously, I consider Shane one of my mentors, but if you had to pick your favorite angle that you worked with Shane, if you had to pick, and I know that's, you know, probably impossible, and maybe you're going to have to pick one that you can remember real quick, but tell me, what would you say your favorite angle working with either the Mortons or Shane specifically? What would you think?
It was definitely the Mortons when we were doing tag teams with Tommy. And, you know, Tommy Higgy, I love Tommy. And Tommy taught me a lot about wrestling. Yeah. And when we were doing that angle with him and Boogie or him and Steve, we always had great matches. I remember one, I was up in Chicago area and Michigan and all up through there for about 7 years. I went up there just about every weekend. And so those guys came down and was watching Southern style wrestling. And we hit Shane with a bottle. And he bled. And, you know, and it was, they couldn't believe the reaction that we had with the crowd. But I think that whole deal with Boogie and with Shane and me and Tommy that's probably my favorite angle, and it lasted for years.
Yeah. It's something about that, I tell you. It's so funny how in Nashville, sometimes they got a little, maybe a little burnout. Some people say that, TNA killed Nashville as far as wrestling goes. Bert for sure said that. But, when it comes down to it, nobody ever got the memo down in Columbia. That wrestling was as much a real thing down there as it ever was anywhere. I think Columbia is such a great wrestling town.
You know what? Because we gave them this. Now I'm gonna jump way back to Lynn Rossi. I used to go once I got trained. Lynn talked to me about wrestling, and he told me, he says, "There's two kinds of BS: BS, and believable BS."
Right.
And he says, if you will put on believable BS, people will come see it. Yeah. He says, if you don't, and now, so we're going to got so far away from anything believable. Like I said earlier, whatever anybody says, they would believe that I was real.
Right.
And,
right.
So, we did that so much, and they believed, because like Shane and Boogie, there's an art to selling. Right. You want to get over as a baby face, sell. You want to pack a house, you have heat. Heat and personal issues will draw. It will draw today, it draw yesterday, it'll draw tomorrow. But you have to have believable BS. Yeah. In order for it to work.
Yeah. And, like Ricky Morton, we're talking about Mortons here. Might as well bring up cousin Ricky here. But Ricky is one of those guys, and that's what makes him one of the greatest baby faces of all time, was that believability and how he would just reach to the crowd and say, under his breath almost, help. He would just mouth, help me. And, something magical about that,
Hey, Ricky was great. We went up, he and I, we flew out of Nashville one time, went up to... I think it was Wisconsin. All these towns start running together. But that was the funnest trip I've ever been on in my life with somebody. And he and we laughed and had the best time, and we worked the match up there and had a great time. And Ricky Morton is excellent. He's a great guy and probably one of the best sellers ever.
No question.
Hey everyone, this is Shane from Insane Shane's World. I release wrestling figures of enhancement talent, mid-card wrestlers, and wrestlers that you never thought would have a figure available. So if you're interested in adding a really cool and rare figure to your collection, then don't hesitate to contact me at shamtheman73@gmail.com. That's SHAMtheman73@gmail.com. You can also join my Facebook group. Just search Insane Shane's World.
Join me, Gene Jackson, for the Jackson Interaction Podcast, where I'll be doing one-on-one interviews with people from the world of professional wrestling, as well as stand-up comedy. You can get them anywhere podcasts are available in both video and audio form, but you can find them all at GeneJacksonPod.com.
Jimmy brought him up here a little bit earlier, but talk to us about working for Bert in Kentucky and like working with some of the power plant guys.
Did you hear about that? I worked with Bert, and we had a good relationship at the beginning.
Sure.
Me and Bert, we sat down and talked and aired out our differences about this and that, and so I started working with him and started working with Colorado. I did a program in Colorado, and great guy. I love Mike.
Mike Rapata.
Great time.
Yeah.
And never an issue with him. Never.
A quintessential Bert Prentice guy, though, right? Colorado kid is a Bert Prentice guy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And but he was. We never had any issues whatsoever. And then I was working a show with. And Bert was there, and I was getting ready to go into a program with Chris Harris. And there was an issue. It wasn't in Kentucky. It was in Spring Hill.
Okay.
And where me and Bert had a falling out, and in the long term, I guess it hurt me. I shouldn't have done it, but I did. But I was getting heat on Shane, and his wife hit the ring, Susan at that time. She hit the ring, and I grabbed her, and I was getting ready to give her a pile driver, and this guy hit the ring. I thought it was a mark, you know, and, you know, I was well versed in taking care of myself.
Sure.
And this guy hit the ring, and I hooked him, and, you know, and threw him out of the ring, you know, and come to find out he was supposedly a worker. And so I did my thing, went back, and Shane come to me. He said, that guy that you threw out, he's wanting a match with you next week. I said, well, book it. well, book it. And so next week come in, and Bert was there and everything. And this guy, he tried to, he's going to try to rough me up. And he found out that wasn't so easy. And I took a chair and busted his head open, and he was in pretty bad shape. And I walked through the door, and after I got finished, because Bubba Morton, I don't know whether you remember Bubba or not.
Oh, yeah, Bubba. Yeah.
Bubba was a referee, and he was down there. That's the funny part. He was down there, and he was hollering, "Do you give up?" Asked the guy, and the guy was hollering, "Yes, yes." and the crowd was saying, he's quitting. Stop it. And I told Bubba, "Don't you ring that bell." He said, "I'm not."
Yeah. Yeah.
And but anyway, I left that guy laying, and
he was asking, "Do you want to continue, y'all?" It wasn't, "Do you want to quit?"
yeah, I wasn't done. So, but I walked back through the dressing room, and Bert looked at me, and he was hot. He said, "Rick Reynolds," he said, "that's the most unprofessional thing I have ever seen in my life." And I said, "Well, Bert," I said, "you don't know the story. It doesn't matter. You should never do that." And that's it. And he said, "What would happen if you done that to him?" I said, "Well," I said, "he would have had his butt whipped, and you'd been mad."
Yeah.
and it went downhill from there. Yeah. And so we then Bert, I guess Bert had after everything, when me and Bert made up, but Bert cost me what I was told, my little TNA run I was going to get. He cost me that, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, was that part of it? Was that the catalyst, the straw that broke the camel's back? Was that it, or was that another scenario?
No, that was his with me, I think, and I didn't know that Bert had did. So I was coming out of the Damien gimmick, and I made up this gimmick called Forsaken.
Yeah. And
I worked just a little bit, just trying to get it, and I was friends with Ron Harris and some of the guys and Brian Lee, and you know, and I love Ron Harris. He's always been straight up, honest, you know, good guy. And so, you know, and Ronnie and Donnie, you know, they had, especially Ronnie, he had his foot in the office and everything. So they were looking to bring me in, and originally they was going to, you know, because they had the new church, and Brian was, I don't know what Wolfie, if he may not even know, I don't know, but Brian was for it. I know that because we talked about it. Sure. And then they brought me in, and I did a dart match, a squash dart match with a guy, and it didn't go as good as I'd worked a guy, Matt Dillinger. Matt's good, and just for some reason it didn't click. And we'd wrestled several times. We just did the same match in Cincinnati, and it was good for Heartland Wrestling. And so it wasn't as good. He fell off the top rope, whatever reason. But it just, things happens. And so I go back. They gave me a critique of the match, and it basically told me, you know, that, you know, I need to lose more of my stomach, get muscled up more. And I was already in the process of doing what I had to do to get that. Yeah. And Mike Sanders, he was a power plant guy. I wrestled Mike on his very first professional match. I wrestled him and educated him on how to wrestle. And I walked through the curtain, and he started critiquing me, and I cussed him out. And back there, because I was already frustrated, and you know, and he I've had more shower time than he had ring time.
Right.
And which probably wasn't good either, because he was in with Russo. And,
yeah.
So anyway, after that, it was I came in the next week and I wasn't on the card. I wasn't, so I sat there, and next week nothing, and then Ronnie called me and he said, they're not going to use you. And I said, they're not. He said, no. He said, evidently you've been blackballed. And so I didn't know who or what. And then I had a friend of mine a few years later tell me, he said, you know who blackballed you at TNA, don't you? And I said, no. He said, Bert did. I said, really?
Man.
He said, yeah. He said, I was right next to him. He said, when you come out of the curtain, he said, well, this is not going to happen. And it didn't. So he got up and went to the back and talked to Ryder and a couple of them, and that was it.
Killed more careers than made, honestly. Let's just be honest. But
and they brought the wall in, right? My spot that they was going to use me, they brought him in right behind me.
Malice, Jerry. Yeah.
Malice, yeah.
Which, if you think about it, I was just thinking that exact same thing, and I was trying to tie the two together, and you just did it for me there, because if you're thinking about it, you all kind of do fit that similar mold, you know what I mean? Big heater dudes, Man, that's a shame, when it comes down to it, to have somebody else ruin your job. That's got to be harsh. I mean, when did you find that out again, Rick? I'm sorry.
That was several years later that Bert was the one who did it. But in the big picture, it was the best. I was really bitter. I was going to quit. And me and Ronnie we had dinner one night and we was talking, and I was telling myself, I'm done. He said, man, don't. And he was telling me a story about Medusa, that he used to date Medusa or married to her. I don't remember which.
Right.
But she told him, she says, y'all should just give it up. You're not that good. You can't do this and you can't do that. And he says, we have traveled the world and we have held every tag team belt of every major company in the world. And he says, if I'd listened to her, we would never have done anything. He said, Rick, your work is okay. Matter of fact, Ronnie put me over down in Nashville on a program, and him and Donnie was tag team champions in WCW. Yeah. And he put me up.
Now, Ronnie, was he the police officer as well? Did he do something
that's a long time.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
But he told me that, and then I had a friend of mine who just kind of jumped. I didn't get much work down here as the Forsaken character. Mike Porter, he told me he didn't like the character, and I still did the Damien thing with Tommy some. But when I started really getting into going up north, and that's where I met Jimmy Blaze. I got a friend of mine he was going up there to work, and he took me, and we went to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and worked for probably the worst company I've ever seen, bar some of the stuff from down in Pensacola. But it was, they told me that they would probably be in the estimate of 700 people there. Yeah. And there was closer to 7 people.
Whoa, man. Wow.
Yeah. And here they brought me in, to go up there and they put me on, okay, you're going to do the dark match. I said, the dark match? I said, you got TV. And they put me against these 2 little guys, and they come to me and start telling me, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. I said, no, we're not going to do that. I said, I'm going to pin you both right in the middle of the ring. I beat them up and pinned them both in the middle of the ring in about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And, and the pay wasn't what it's supposed to be. And we went, after everything was said and done, everybody left, we went and we started talking about wrestling. A guy named Dave Storm and Jimmy Blaze was the only 2 guys that would really talk to me, and my buddy. And we started talking about wrestling.
Yeah.
And why it wasn't drawing, and it was horrible. Poor booking, no stories, no characters, no. They just went out there and did stuff.
Sure.
And so they started. I talked to them about it. And they said, we're going to start a company and do that. And I was like, yeah, okay. And they said, well, if we do, will you come work? I said, sure. And So a few months later, Dave called me up. He said, we're starting a company called Classic Championship Wrestling, and we want you to be a part of it. And I was up there for 7 years. Then when Jimmy bought Dave out, they changed it to POW Entertainment. And it was, like I said, Jimmy was the reason why I started loving wrestling again, because they put on, man, some of the youth, the young guys they brought in, excellent.
Yeah.
It make you proud to be a wrestler.
That's awesome. And you were kind of a liaison for a lot of the guys from Tennessee to come up there, right?
Absolutely, I was.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've seen pictures Jamie Dundee shared with him and Buzzed Up and Shane Morton and all kinds
I've got
of stuff.
stories. Lord,
Yeah,
I've heard that.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to lead to. So if you've heard our show, and you said you have, I know you know that we play a little game called the name game. So in the name game, we ask you names, and you just give us your first thought. If you give us a story, that's great. If you just give us one word, or if you just say, I think I'll pass, that's okay too. But Rick Reynolds, would you like to play the name game?
Yes, I would.
All right. We'll be right back. DJ, hit the music. All right, we are back with the name game and Mr. Rick Reynolds. And Rick, we have, some good names here. They're interesting names, and I kind of want to just get your opinion on these and just see how things are. So with the very first one, my brother Jared's going to take this one. Jared?
So this man's had a lot in the business, and some people say that he's the only man to really ever beat Vince McMahon in the business, Eric Bischoff.
I don't like. Well,
I mean,
I guess somebody told you about that too.
Our sources we can't name, but they're very good. Let's just say that.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of Eric Bischoff, and he probably shouldn't be a big fan of mine either.
Okay.
I'll say that.
Okay. Fair enough. We'll leave it at that then. Do you want to elaborate on that?
No.
Okay. And see, that's your right as the name game participant. So the next name, and we brought him up earlier on, but maybe give us a little more, a little something different there. And we brought him up, the big scorpion, Pete Cannon.
I love Pete, and me and Pete was friends for years and years. The funny story about Pete was that Pete, I always thought Pete was a wrestler, because I worked for him over at the hospital, and he talked to me about going here and going there and doing this, doing that, and I always thought he was a wrestler.
Yeah.
And then when I started, and he knew, and then I started wrestling, and he said, well, here, let me go with you. And so we started going over to Hartsville, and he was coming with me, and so they wanted to do something with him. And he kept putting it off, and then he went and got this fake cast and put on. He said, well, I can't wrestle because I hurt my arm and all that. And we was coming back, and I said, Pete, shake my hand as a wrestler would shake my hand. And he didn't know.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, okay. And then I worked with Pete for a while, and but also Pete he had a great knowledge of the business, and and he was a really smart guy, smart guy.
Yeah.
And I love Pete, and I was just happy that he was part of my life.
Yeah. Now, that kind of leads me into another question here, and I like that you brought that up. And we, I know the handshake, it's kind of somewhat common knowledge, unfortunately, now, but at that time, it definitely was not. Talk about it now. If a guy comes up in the locker room and gives you the wrestler handshake, what are your thoughts at first? Maybe a young guy.
Well, I've had guys do it, and they're just terrible in the ring. And there was one guy up in Chicago when we first started. He did that, and I thought, okay. I said, this will be okay. Yeah. And I told him, I said, Chris Danger was my manager then, and Chris was great. And every time we do something, or I do something, he said, oh no, we're getting fired.
Yeah.
So this guy did that to me, and Jimmy wanted me to put this guy over. I said, okay. So he shook my hand, and I said, okay. I said, we start out, and I said, grab a top wrist lock. He said, I don't know how to do that. I said, but don't worry about it. So
oh man,
got in there, and I beat the dog out of him. And I had Chris slide me in a chair, and I told the guy, move, and I hit the top rope, hit myself. I said, pin me, and I pulled him on top of me. And he held 1, 2, 3, and at the 3 count, I kicked out and got right back on him again, and then went to the dressing room, and he went and complained on me because he thought I jobbed him out. I said, how could I do that? I put you over.
Yeah.
You went over.
Yeah.
But you know, when somebody does that, I automatically think they can work.
Sure.
And that's not always the case.
You know, it's always funny, and I was a manager. I kind of came in at a different time where it was kind of passe, and not as many guys did it. But you know, the guys like Arvil did one, and you know, Tommy would kind of give you one, and Mike Porter would give you one, and Mike's always felt a little creepier than others. But anyway, we'll get into a different story there. But you could always tell, like Tommy, Arvil, those guys, that's coming from a real place, you know. And but I remember somebody, and I can't remember, but I would shake their hand. Oh my Lord, he's stiff. Oh my Lord, he's gonna break my, you know. So some guys would just use it as a way. You know, my thinking that it was over with would use it as a way to give you a hard time or rib you a little bit, you know, but anyway.
So you mentioned this earlier, that it was the hardest chop you ever got. Cool Breeze.
Cool Breeze. I love Breezy. And I hadn't seen Breezy in several years, but last time I saw him, he was just the same. But Breezy, just a good old country boy, and he was the same always. And just like I said, he was tough. Lord, he was tough. You couldn't hurt him.
Yeah. Okay, well then what about, you brought him up recently too and have great things to say about him, but Jimmy Blaze.
I love Jimmy Blaze. Jimmy, like I said, he was one of the reasons that made me love wrestling again. He as a matter of fact, they just celebrate or getting ready to celebrate 20 years as a promotion up in Chicago area. And they run a couple times a month. At one time, they was running just about every weekend. But, you know, as the business, it's dropped down. But he's been running for 20 years up there. And I love Jimmy. Matter of fact, I love most of the guys up there. And they got excellent workers. You know, always felt. Let me tell you what kind of Jimmy Blaze and a guy named Eric Freedom. Eric's out of Cadillac, Michigan. Yeah. So I'll try to be quick on this. I was going through a really bad time. Was going process divorce. Job I had, the high paying job I had, went away. I was struggling, and I was struggling with life. And I still made my booking up there, and I didn't have a pot to be in or one to throw it out of. Yeah. And but I still made my booking, and I got up there, and I never said nothing to nobody. And Eric, later I found out Eric was one that spearheaded it. But every one of the boys and Jimmy, off the door, gave me all their money to help me, and it was you know, I think $1,200-$1,500 that those guys gave to me because I was in such a bad shape that they gave me. So that tells me, you know, and should tell everybody what a brotherhood is, and what they thought of me, and I could never repay them for what they did for me that day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, that means a lot. So let me ask you about this one then. How about Ashley Hudson?
I love Ashley. Ashley, as a matter of fact, I worked him his very first match that he had in Tennessee. And he probably had 3 or 4 or 5 matches over in California, and then he come to Tennessee. He said I beat him up. I don't remember that.
Yeah, Ashley Hudson and Corey Williams came to New South. What a great tag team. But anyway, I don't mean to cut you off. Yeah, great tag team.
Great tag team. I love Corey, too. There's a million stories, but me and Tommy was working him and Kid Thrill up in Springfield one time, and we had to stop the match because of laughter. Corey he was cutting up and he had the crowd going. We were dying laughing. Here's the Big Bag Devils we're just dying laughing at Corey Williams.
Yeah. So, Jared, imagine this. Ashley Hudson, Australian. Corey Williams, African-American. And they were wearing a very Southern style gimmick. They call themselves the New South. Tell me that's not heat. They're wearing Confederate flag gear and stuff. It's hilarious.
That's nuclear.
I'm from down under, and he's from over yonder.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta love it.
Yeah, that was their gimmick.
Yeah, that was when, you had Wolfie and Flash Flanagan together, and you had the Tennessee Vols, and they were kind of tearing it up in Music City and, that kind of stuff. So, yeah. What about Rick Posey?
I loved Rick Posey. Me and Rick was huge, and he used to ride with me everywhere. And he told me one time, he says, I picked him up, and he said, Ricky, man, he says, I just want to tell you. And Rick, he played football for the Oakland Raiders during the strike season. I think he played for Murray State. But big old arms, big old chest. And he said, man, I just want to tell you something. He said, you're a pretty cool white boy. I said, why you say that for, Ricky? He said, man, I didn't know what to think about you. And you start taking me all these back roads. He said, but you're cool. And me and Rick, I hate that he passed. But he was married to one of the gladiators that, the old school gladiators.
American Gladiators.
American Gladiators, awesome.
Wow, that's crazy. That's awesome. Okay, well, this one, this is kind of a specific one, but you can go into more detail. He's famous for knowing he's sorry about your luck, but, Shane, Wolfie, they kind of are a similar situation of who trained who and versus this guy, James Storm, and specifically about a move or lack of ability move in the ring.
Well, you got sources, don't you?
I do.
I tell you, I love James, and but when he was young, he was full of himself, and so I don't remember the town we were in, and he was young and just starting, and
didn't have a hair on his face.
No, he was young, and I was talking to somebody. He come up to me and he says, "Hey," he says, I don't remember the move. He said, "We're going to do this." He said, "You think you can do it?" I said, "No, I don't think I can do that." And he kind of and turned around and walked off. And we got in the ring. And he shot me in. I said, "I didn't call that." I kicked him and hooked him. And the funny part of it is that years later I saw him, and he said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "I didn't understand the reason you did that for years." He said, "But I do now." He said, "I was down in Mississippi, and this young guy come up to me and said, 'Hey, can you do this? This right here is what I'm going to do.'" And he says, "I understand why you did what you did now." Yeah. You know what's funny is I met him and Robert Roode, and I was dating a girl at the time, and we got out of a late movie, and Robert Roode and James Storm were walking through the parking lot, and I'm just like, holy cow, I don't even know if they were beer money at the time. And they're walking through and the only one of them walked up and actually shook our hand though. And guess who that was? James. Yeah, exactly. James is a good man. Yeah, he was the real one. And I was like, okay, Robert Roode, I see you. I see you. I respect you. You're a great talent, but I see you, So Anyway, maybe it's just a Canadian thing. Who knows? We'll get into that another time. But Jared, you got the next one.
All right. We mentioned him a little bit, or you mentioned him a little bit earlier, one of us, Buzzed Up. Buzzy. Stab.
That's my didn't think I'm going to stab him. He said something about my daughter one time. I said, "I'll stab you."
Oh, man. Oh, Lord. Yeah.
So I'll stab you.
Yeah.
And so that's our, if you notice on Facebook, when he says something, I'll say something, stab.
Yeah.
And but I love Buzzy. Buzzy said I beat him up one time. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I did when we were doing TV.
Yeah.
Because I've always liked Buzzy, and I think Buzzy's a tremendous talent. He's a great big guy, and I think Buzzy's one of my dear friends.
He's a very good big man, and he's for his size, he's got some agility to him, and he can go. He's got a gas tank on him too,
Yeah, and he knows the business.
Right. Right.
Me and Buzzy one time, and me, Buzzy, and Danger was going up to Chicago, and I was driving, and Danger was on the passenger seat, and Buzzy was in the middle. So we was driving, we was going up, and Danger kept. We had a new car, had the remotes on the steering wheel, and Danger would get over and start fiddling with the radio to get to the station he want to listen to, and as soon as he'd lean back, I'd reach over and I'd change it, on by the steering wheel, and never say nothing. I'm just driving, and he started looking. He said, "Did you see that?" He said, "There's something wrong with this blame radio." And then Buzzy picked up that what I was doing, and he's right in the middle. And Buzzy's a big guy, and you can see I look in the back in the rearview mirror, and he's just chuckling. His whole body's just shaking. And Danger was just cussed. "What's wrong with this thing?" I said, "What?" He said, "Watch it." And he would put it on the station. He said, "Watch it, it'll change." And I'd sit there and look at it, and we wouldn't do nothing. He said, "He was doing it." I said, "Oh, sit back." And he would sit back, and then I would change it. He said, "See?" And Buzzy was just crying in the back.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, this guy, the next guy I want to bring up is actually I've noticed him in a different gimmick than what you were familiar with him, but he's actually got a little career going in the NWA. They were most recently in the Crockett Cup. He's got a clown gimmick now, but you knew him as Thunderfoot.
Yeah. Bobby is a great talent. And I tell you what, he did the Indian gimmick better than anybody that I have ever seen.
Joel Deaton himself, right?
Yeah, he was good. As a matter of fact, for years, brought him down here to Columbia a couple of times, and for a long time, people always ask, when's that Indian going to come back? When's that Indian going to come back?
Yeah.
And his brother is Rough Crossing, and now they're doing the clown gimmick now.
Yeah, but now he's known as Yabo the Clown, and then that's. But what's funny is I've kind of seen him working that gimmick for a little bit now, and it's a really original gimmick. And Doink was not the only clown in wrestling. I mean, there's been many, but there's been many Doinks too. But
do you know where Doink originated from? Back when UWF or whatever it was that I was starting for, they had a wrestling clown, and I can't think of his name, but he was from Nolensville. WWF was down in Nashville, so this guy in full clown gimmick jumped the rail, got in the ring, hit the rope, jumped on the top rope, did a flip off, and they grabbed him and took him out. And Gene Okerlund says, "Who do you think you are?" "Oh, Willie." He says, "I'm Willie the wrestling clown. Who are you?" And they got him out, and next thing you know, there's Doink, the wrestling clown.
Maybe there's some tie to that, I do believe. That's interesting. Yeah, sure, Jared, take the next one. I think this will be a good one.
Jamie Dundee.
Aha! Let me tell you something, Jamie. What a prize.
Yeah.
Jamie, I've had a blast with Jamie. Jamie's Jamie. And I tell you what I like about Jamie is Jamie is the same with me, and as far as I know, with everybody. As that's who he is.
Right.
Jamie's always helped and done. When I was going through my bad spot, I told you earlier, Jamie, him and his father-in-law had a painting business, painting tanks, water tanks. Yeah. And he brought me up to Fredericksburg, Virginia, to help paint a tank, and because I was down, and he brought me up there and paid me to do that. And me and Jamie stayed in the room, and I have never laughed. He walked out of the dressing room one time. He had just had a towel on with no teeth, and he looked at his stomach sticking out. And he said, "Look here." He said, "What a prize." He said, "All them women want me. What a prize."
I've offered to Jamie, I've told him he needs to be a comedian, and I know many people have. And, he says, "Oh, I can't remember the same thing every night." And I said, "Well, Jamie, I'll ride around with you and we'll put in an earpiece." But then I took that back because I don't know if I could commit to that life, of being Jamie's earpiece guy. But, anyway.
I told Jamie, we're sharing a room. I said, "Jamie, you can't be smizzing in here." I said, "You can't be smizzing." "All right." And he'd go outside. And, but I love Jamie.
Yeah.
I just talked to him a few months ago.
Yeah. Now, I like to call him Mr. Modest. He's been known as the Brown Bomber. He's been one of Bobby Eaton's tag team partners. He's also one of my favorite Mephistos. But when it comes down to it, we all know him as Arvel Hutto.
Hut is a great guy. Hut, he's a genuine, nice, caring person. Just don't let him punch you.
Just don't let him punch you.
Don't let him punch you. I told him one time, I said, Hut, he hit me so hard one time, I thought he knocked my tooth out. And, and I told him, I said, let me tell you something, Hut. From now on, I said, when you hit me, just hit me with everything you got. It's got to be easier than your working punch.
So what is it about the Mephisto gimmick that makes these guys knock people's teeth out? What is it? Because I've heard that about Cool Breeze too.
Cool's stiff, but he, I was never stiff with anybody unless I had to be.
Sure.
You asked some of the guys, I never was stiff with them, but if I had to be, because I was raised and brought up into a time that if somebody was stiff with you, then you're a little stiffer with them.
Sure. Sure. Unless you're down by the crowd or something, you got to keep it snug there.
How about friend of the podcast and one of the first guests on the podcast that we really had, Jeremiah Plunkett?
Plunky, I love Plunky. I think Plunky is a great talent, and I am so happy he's still in the business, because as long as he's in the business, there's still a chance for professional wrestling.
Yeah.
He great guy, knows the game. I was a little Plunky story. Him and another guy wrestled down in Columbia one time, and they just stunk the house up. I mean, it was horrible. And they come back in the dressing room, and I ate them up. And then I left, went up north. Like I said, I was gone 7 years or so. And I come back, and I remember Buzzy telling me, he says, Rick, you ought to see Plunky. He said, Plunky's got it. I said, what? He said, yeah, you ought to see him. And I watched within Lewisburg, and I went out and watched Plunky's match, and it was outstanding. I mean, he made that guy look like $1 million, and great match, great psychology, just everything. And I was so proud of him. Matter of fact, I believe I hugged him when he came back in.
Yeah. He's a great guy. Yeah, great guy. He's a great friend, and long time. He believed in me too, and helped me do stuff when I was in a dark spot. And we've talked about that several times on the show, but Plunky was there for me. When it comes down to it, I always got time for Plunky. I'm glad that he's doing something in the business. I truly one day hope that the business gives back to Plunky what he's given to the business. I know it never does, usually. But, when it comes down to it, I hope someday he truly cashes out big time, So
I do too. He deserves it. He's a great talent, great. I have nothing but praise for Plunky.
Absolutely. So Jeremy Flint was a tag team partner with Plunky at one time. Actually, a great, humble guy, hilarious too. Tell you a funny story. He got me, a Middle Eastern manager, and Big Seven, Jermaine Austin. He got us both to do a dance in the ring as if he had hypnotized us to do this. Now,
I saw that. Yeah. I saw it. Was that him?
Yeah, that was him.
I saw it on the page.
Yeah. That was kind of a common thing going around some of the indies at that time, and he used that for Porter one time at NWA Main Event, and it was hilarious. It worked, and is it gonna be? Is Harley Race and Wahoo McDaniel gonna love it? No, but well, sometimes there's got to be funny too. But you got
to entertain the crowd, and that's where people miss the mark. A lot of guys, they want to get up and they want to get their stuff in, and they just want to entertain them or the people in the back. But, they forget, people who's paying their money.
Yeah.
That's who you want to entertain. And you want them to have emotion. Of whatever emotion, as it was told to me, Lynn Rossi used to tell me, he says, you tell the fans when to stand, you tell them when to sit.
Yeah.
You tell them what emotion that you want them to have. That's what you have to do as a wrestler.
Yeah.
If you want them to cry, if you want them to cheer, whatever you want, that's the ideal. when I was down at TNA, some of the guys, Dusty Rhodes was one of the best.
Oh man!
When I was down there, I would up on top. They had little slats, and me and Kurt Hennig would stand up there and we'd look. Not that me and Kurt Hennig were friends, because we weren't, but we'd stand up there in the match and look through, and just chit chat a little bit. And he was telling me, he said, look at here. He said, these guys, and there was guys flying all around, flip-flopping, boom, boom, and nothing. You know, the crowd sitting there and giving little golf claps or something, you know. And then I think it was Jeff Jarrett and Dusty Rhodes come out.
Yeah.
And with one finger, Dusty Rhodes had the entire crowd on their feet yelling with one finger. When he was sitting there selling, and he started, and he started moving his finger and then showing life. And he had the whole crowd into it. So it's not what you do, it's how you do it.
Right.
You know,
right.
And so many people lose that. You know, it's just a dying art, it seems.
Yeah. So my last name of the name game, and of course we've talked about Shane and other guys throughout it, and we've talked about this gentleman too, but I feel like there may be something else you can say here. He's probably one of my favorite guys in the business as far as the guys that have done it all and done it well. He's your former tag team partner. He's a devil. He's a great booker, just so well versed in psychology, incredible talent, and also, when it comes down to it, he can sew a mean mask, Mr. Tommy Hickey.
Tommy used to make this, I don't know whether you know, but what we'd make juice masks, you know, because I guess me and Tommy were tagged longer than anybody,
right.
You know, constantly. And he would make us juice masks. So if you're ever looking on the tape, and I normally wear a black and red.
Right.
If you ever see me wear a red and white mask, that means I'm juicing. And we would tape it, and he made all the stuff. But Tommy, I still don't think Tommy gets the accolades he needs, or don't need, but he should have, because, you know, like with me, when they put me with Tommy, I was honored. And I'm going to tell you, it was probably close to 5 years. I know it's hard to believe, but I never said nothing in the dressing room.
Wow.
You know, because I wasn't allowed to say anything.
Sure.
You know, as a new guy, you go in there and you sit down, and as I was saying, keep your mouth shut and your ears open.
Right.
And that's where you learn. And I learned under Tommy because I kept my mouth shut, my ears open. And I remember to this day, we were in Columbia, and we were working the Mortons. And I was sitting there, and I was listening to Tommy lay out the match. And he looked over and put his hand on me. He said, Ricky, what do you think? And I was so honored that he even acknowledged, you know, what's my opinion? And of course, I said, whatever you say, you know.
Right.
But, you know, but I learned from him and listening. And some of the things we was with Porter. And as a matter of fact, I've heard Porter stories. I always liked Mike. Mike always paid me. I think I'm one of the few people that he always did. He never, ever, because I always cut my deal before I went. I say, here, this is what I want. If you can't, and I sit at home sometimes, but he always paid me. If he couldn't pay me, he would say, Ricky, I'll catch you next week, okay? I said, that's fine. And next week I'd walk through the door, and he'd have my money. And, but me and Tommy just, you know, everybody said, all these good things about Tommy, and they're all true. He was a master at his craft. You know, he was a second generation wrestler. You know, now his boys, you know, they wrestled some. Tommy's a nice guy. He's tough. You know, he's everything that a wrestler should be.
Yeah,
and that's just encompassed of Tommy Hickey.
Yeah, he's that and all that. And, you know, I always knew when he was in the locker room that there was at least somebody that knew what that was going on. You know. You know, we had people that quit. They packed stuff. They found out they was wrestling me and Tommy. They believed the gimmick so much that they quit. They packed their stuff up and walk out. And that happened more than once. Yeah.
That they would leave. And that's a night off, as long as you listen. Had one kid come up to us one time, and me and Tommy were sitting there talking, and he come up and he started saying, well, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And Tommy looked at me, and I looked at Tommy, and we looked back at the guy and told him, I said, let me tell you something, son. I said, if you go over and sit in that chair and you listen to what we tell you, we may be able to make it through this night. Right. And his eyes got big. He went over and sat, and I had a great match with him. Great match. And, but you don't have to go through everything. And that's one of the things that I learned with Tommy of how to call things on the fly. I didn't even know, to jump way back to the beginning, I didn't even know to my first match that you talked in the ring.
Yeah.
Once I found that out, I said, man, this makes it easy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Well, guess what? That's the end of the name game, Rick Reynolds. And guess what? You got a passing score of 100. So good job.
Thank you. That was easy.
Yeah. I know there's a million other names, and guys, don't get your feelings hurt. We'll get them on the next go around. I promise. So
I'm going to tell you this real quick. When I was down in Pensacola, I hung out with Don Fargo. And
wow. Okay.
He was at this bar called, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, we'd go down there and talk to him. And we'd be talking, and we'd bring up a name, and he'd always say, are they dead? And he'd say, no, they're still alive. He's the greatest guy in the world. And he'd say, no, he's dead. He said, I can't stand him.
Well, you didn't go into that. So now at the end of every show, I always give my brother the last question. He starts with the first one and ends with the last one. Some people consider this the Jimmy Street podcast. Well, I couldn't do it without him. So, but I'm giving Jared a couple here. So go ahead, Jared, wrap us up here with Rick, and then I'll finish us out.
So, Rick, I know you've talked about how, there was a person before the person you are now, and I know how important my relationship with Christ is. So, just tell us about when you got saved, and how about becoming a minister and everything like that.
I was an atheist most of my life, and went through a bunch of stuff that we would go through a whole nother podcast on. But in 2008, Jesus smacked me, and I realized that there's more to life than just me. And it was a eye-opening miracle that took place, and he changed me. And every day, I'm so thankful that he did, that he loved me, no matter what I did in the past. I crucified guys in the ring, juiced them up. I made fun of God. I used to have a shirt that I walked around with that had 666 on it. But all the stuff I did, Christ still loved me. And at my lowest, he was there, and he changed me, and I'm forever grateful. And he gave me back my life.
Amen, brother. That's awesome.
I wish we had another hour. I could just, but I would, because that's one of the things I get passionate about is my relationship and what he did for me. And, I get in the dressing room, and like we was running Columbia down there, we would sit in the dressing room, and Michael Pleasing was a devout Christian too.
Great guy.
And
miss him. All right. Rest in peace. Rest in peace.
Love him. And I'll tell you, somebody else is a devout Christian that I didn't know. Is Timmy Renesto.
Yeah.
And
wow. Okay.
Me and Timmy and all the heels, we'd be sitting there and we'd have Bible study. We'd run outside and we'd do our match, and we'd come back, okay, where we're at. And we'd sit there and have Bible study and talk Jesus. And man, it was just a wonderful time. And that's when I really realized that people listen to what you're saying, and my actions, and I'm not the same guy. I've traveled several times overseas. I've had the opportunity to speak to 8,000 Zulu tribesmen. Thousands of them, gave their life to Jesus. I went to Belize, a couple of times, and just saw great works in what he does. And one of the things I always tell everybody, God is real. He's as real as I'm sitting here talking to you. He's real, because that's one of the things I struggled with, was that God wasn't real, that he doesn't do this. And that is straight from Satan, that he's not real, and he is.
Right.
So I'll be quiet because I know that we need to get going.
That's awesome, brother.
And when you really get down, you get down to the bottom, and you have nothing else to reach for, he's always there. And if anybody's listening to this podcast, let me tell you, if you ever need me, if you ever would like to talk, if you ever have questions, get in touch with me. I'd love to talk with you.
And that's awesome. Yeah, that's very cool.
Appreciate that. That was an awesome answer, man.
So go ahead, Jared. Now this is the one that doesn't matter as much.
This question seems so much more
trivial.
Trivial, exactly, trivial. Thank you for the word. But if you can think back on your career, and there's just like a match that's like your most memorable or your favorite match you ever had, what would that be?
Man, that's hard. Shane and I have had numerous great matches. I tell you what I would do. Shane already knows how I feel about him. And, I would say my match up in New York at POW, when I was leaving there, my match with Scott Spade.
Okay.
And I was leaving, and I was going to put Scott over, and we get out there, and he wouldn't let me put him over, and he wanted me to go over. As a matter of fact, that's the very, very first time that I threw a drop kick in my 32 years of wrestling, was that night. And he begged me, he said, please throw one, and I hit him in the chin with it. Perfect drop kick. But I think that was probably one of the most special matches I've had.
That's
Even
awesome.
though me and Eric Freedom had some great matches, I think me and Scott Spade, that would be my pick.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, hey, Rick, like you said, man, we could talk another hour, maybe a whole other podcast, but unfortunately, we're kind of starting to wrap things up here. Man, I so appreciate you as the man you are. I appreciate your faith. I appreciate your, being who you were to this business. And especially, I unfortunately didn't get to work with you as much, but you mean so much to so many people that mean so much to me. So you're automatically cool in my book, but not only are you cool like that, but you're also cool as a man. You're a great guy, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you in the past, but also getting to know you more tonight. I just thank you so much for spending this time with us. I know you're a busy man and you're getting home to see the babies, and we've taken time out of that. And so from us, we thank you so much for doing that for us, because I know that time is so important to you. So Rick, just thank you again, and we hope to have you back soon, brother. Is there anything you'd like to say before we leave?
Yeah. Before we leave, I'd just like to say thanks, for having me. I really appreciate it. Also, I would like to tell my family, thank you so much for putting up with me. It's, Kelsey and Rachel, and Lauren, and Cody, and Zach, and Abigail, and now we got 2 babies that stay with us. There's Vivian and Bink Bink. That's the baby. I love her. I love all of them, but I love that baby too.
Yeah.
And just for allowing me to be daddy and be grandpa and do all the things. I really appreciate my family, and I love them dearly. And most important, I like to thank my wife, who laughs at my jokes and listens to all my stories. Thanks for what you do with our family. And I love my friends, and I really appreciate you giving me the format to sit here and talk. I really appreciate you, Jimmy. Thank you.
Hey, I appreciate you, Rick. And like I said, we'll get you back soon. I've got some plans. Maybe it'll involve multiple guests at the same time. Who knows? I'm always working on show ideas. So some way, somehow down the line, we'll get you back on. So thank you all so much for listening, not only to me and my brother, but also to Mr. Rick Reynolds, who is just as great as he sounds on this podcast in real life too. So if you ever chance to meet him or see him, shake his hand, ask him how he's doing, because he's going to tell you some great stories. All right, Rick. Thank you, brother. You've been awesome,
Thanks,
man.
Jimmy.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Jared. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, appreciate you, buddy.
I appreciate that. Was fun. Thank you.
Good. That's what we like.
Okay, good.
So thank you, Rick. For my brother Jared, the Plastic Sheik Street, this has been Jimmy Street with Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling. We'll be right back after these messages.
This is The Big Picture, Michael Jablonski. Don't forget to tune in every week to Jablonski's Pissed Off on the Mike Jablonski's Pissed Off YouTube channel.
The Hot in the sport, he's gonna tell you all about it. He doesn't care what you think, you're gonna hear all about it. Mike Jablonski, he's so pissed off. Mike Jablonski, he's so pissed off. Mike Jablonski, he's so pissed off. He's pissed off.
If you're a fan of rock and music, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to check out my podcast. It's called the Decibel Geek Podcast. We've been doing it for about 10 years now. We talk about Kiss. We talk about Ozzy. We talk about Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and Metallica. We talk about all the legends from the 60s and on, up to brand new bands that you should be hearing about today that you're not going to hear on the radio. It's Decibel Geek. Wherever you find your podcasts, you'll find us there. If you love rock and roll, I can almost guarantee you're going to love my show.
Oh, man, Sheik, was that not cool or what, man? Rick Reynolds, what a cool story. Just what a cool guy, man. Really, really great story. I know I say that all the time. I'm like, cool guy, cool story. But seriously, that was a really cool deal, man. Very happy with that interview right there.
Yeah, man, it's cool to talk to a guy like that. You know, he was, driving down the road before he talked to us, and he pulled over and talked to us for 2 hours and took time out of his trip back home to do that. So, that shows just how awesome of a guy he is.
Yeah. Not only did he work around our schedule because you were going out of town on vacation for 8 years, and he made time out of his busy schedule to make that happen for us. And just a really cool guy, and we're really blessed to have that interview, man. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, man. It was just great to, I thought a special part of the interview was just hearing his his transformation of his life. He was going down a path where he just didn't believe in anything, and then he found Christ. So it was awesome to hear.
Absolutely very cool testimony. And eventually we're going to have him back on, but as of right now, I'm just very happy with what we got there. And some of the names mentioned, just let's go down the list here. Gypsy Joe, Wolfie D, Dante and Mephisto, Shane Morton, his buddies up in Chicago, Eric Freedom, Jimmy Blaze, Scott Spade, who, by the way, Scott Spade's, we've already reached out to him. He'll be a future guest. I'm excited to get some of the guys that some of our guys know that I don't know, but it'll be good to get to know that guy. So, our next episode we got coming up is Doug Markham. I'm excited about that because he's got a really cool story. It's funny, and I don't want to go too much into it, but he's done a lot of things. I'm excited to have our very first referee on too,
Yeah, so it's going to be a new one for Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling. So we may have to change up my Mount Rushmore question a little bit for him to see a little bit more aspects for him.
Yeah, modify the Rushmore a little bit there. I think, we're going to be having, we're not only going to have wrestlers on, we're going to have everybody that's involved. As you know, we've already had Dave Milliken on an excellent episode. If you haven't listened to that, go back and check it out. That guy knows more about belts. He's forgot more about belts than I know. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And to me, that was just a cool interview. So I love having the guys that are not the wrestlers, but are very important to wrestling too, so.
Oh, yeah.
And Doug's one of those guys. And, we've been chatting back and forth, and he's listened to most of the episodes. And with that being said, though, very excited to have Doug on. Man, I've got a great list of names, and I don't want to spill them just yet. I've talked about having Krull and Plunky on to talk about the Satoshi Kojima NWA and stuff. But, man, I've got some cool names. Like I said, I don't want to spill the beans yet. But, just to kind of say, trust us, some excellent names are coming up that you'll want to hear their story too. So,
yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing all the stories from these guys we got coming up. I think it'll be good listens for our listeners, and, just stick with us, man. We got the best is yet to come.
Absolutely. And I recently talked to Shane Morton about this too. I talked to him back in the day about us doing a Galoob specific show coming up, getting a little action figure love. So we may take a slight break from the interviews here in the next month or so. And we're going to bring Shane Morton on, maybe bring Gene Jackson on, and we'll talk some Galoob action figures and specifically the WCW. And we're not just going to talk all Galoob, but to talk, so that's going to be on you, Jut. That one's going to be on.
We're just going to talk the history of Galoob itself. No, I'm just
kidding. Yeah. Well, maybe you need to know a little bit about the history of Galoob, but that one's going to be on you, Sheik. So, but I'll host it, but you need to be the mind on that one. So that's your territory. Yeah. So yeah.
I have to brush up on my Galoob history.
Yeah, so last night, our mom's in the hospital. Keep praying. She's coming home today, hopefully. Today is the 4th of July, so y'all happy 4th of July. Hope it's awesome. Hope you didn't blow your fingers off or anything fun like that. But, hope it's been good. I love the 4th of July, always fun. But our mom's coming home from the hospital. If you could say a prayer for her, we definitely appreciate it. She had back surgery, and we hope that everything goes smoothly for her there. But, one thing I will say is we are home right now together with my son and my mom we're visiting my mom and having my son for summer vacation. And so we're all kind of together right now. So we may be doing some other stuff coming up that'll drop as special episodes. You never can tell, especially since we have former guest of the show, Cash Street, in town as well. Maybe we'll get
Colossus.
Yeah, Colossus. Maybe we'll get Plastic Sheik Jr. involved as well, but we'll see about that. But anyway, when it comes down to it, though, we just appreciate all y'all for listening. If you can, give us 5 stars. We love it. We appreciate it. If everyone that listened right now would just click 5 stars, that would mean so much to us. It would show us that you guys are listening out there, and we greatly appreciate that. The other thing is, if you can, go follow us on GMBMPW on all your social media platforms. There may be even a TikTok coming soon, actually in the works, maybe very soon, so we'll see about that. Thank y'all again, though, for all the support you do, especially the involvement on the Facebook group. One thing is funny, our guest today, the interviewee, Rick Reynolds, he is the new GMBMPW social media champion, because he literally probably just brought, I would say maybe 50 people or more to the Facebook group, which, I think Hammerjack had held the record at first, and then it turned into Chris Michaels a little, and Shane Morton got us a lot. But a lot of times it's funny when, we get a new guest and they notice they're not friends with us and stuff, or they don't follow us. They start following us. So it's good. But I think Rick outdid himself on this one. He absolutely did. I know he had brought at least 50 people to the Facebook group, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, thank you for that, Rick. Thank you, new listener. Thank you, old listener. Thank you, Facebook group member. All that. But yeah, I don't have anything else. Sheik, what do you have anything else?
No, man, I just happy to be a part of these interviews, and as always, I say it every time, but I feel like it's great to learn about some of these guys that I may not necessarily know a lot about, and to find out how big an impact they really have had in the business, even though they're always usually modest and they're like, well, I didn't really do anything. And then you hear what they did and you're like, yeah, I think you did.
That's just Arvel that said that.
But it's great. It's great to hear from these guys, and I'm excited for all of them to come.
Absolutely. We'll have more very soon. You guys just stick with us. Promise more interviews and your favorite pro wrestlers coming soon. If you guys have any thoughts and ideas for interviews that you'd like to see on our show, feel free to hit us up on our socials and put the name of the person you'd like to see on there or listen to on there, and we'll see what we can do about getting them on the show. So once again, for our guest, Rick Reynolds, my co-host, the Plastic Sheik, Jared Street, I'm Jimmy Street. We're Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, and we'll see y'all next time.
Don't forget.
I really want to hear that full Eric Bischoff story.
Me too.
With a tear in my eye,
This is the greatest moment in my life.
We'll see you later.
This has been a James Rock Street production.